Yes.
I love this stuff. That was awesome.
So my name is Kevin Irizarry. I am an accounts supervisor and I'm gay. So I didn't come out until a little bit later in life. I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio, and I'm an only child and I'm the only boy of a Catholic Irish, half Puerto Rican Catholic mixed family. So I feel like, a lot of my life was spent just kind of romanticizing the expectations of being in a heterosexual relationship. So it wasn't really until I came to New York when I was 23 that I kind of felt comfortable starting to even acknowledge that side of myself. So it kind of culminated with coming out to my best friends on New Year's Eve, that first year that I lived here, and then kind of slowly building out from there, people knowing, with, my family kind of coming as like the last piece of it. So I think it was a little bit tough too, because I had a very serious girlfriend all the way through college up until moving to New York City, and we parted ways mainly because I was moving here and she had another year of school left and was staying in the Midwest, and I kind of came here and just like started to see all the world around me of what New York had to offer, and I knew that was always here, and I knew that piece of me was always in there. So coming here and trying to figure that out for myself was a journey. But then the moment after, kind of telling everyone, it was funny because all my best friends who knew me best always knew, but there was a good amount of people from back home and in my past that were pretty surprised by it in a lot of ways. And I think one of the hardest things that I dealt with was feeling guilty with, putting on a front of, building all these relationships for my whole life, and then basically telling everyone that ever loved me that, I wasn't exactly the person that I thought I was. So it's funny, one of my coworkers was actually there, who I'm very good friends with now, and she had a huge crush on me like that whole year. And I think she thought that I was going to end up being her New Year's kiss that night. And then it was kind of like at the stroke of midnight, I was just like, sorry. And then told everyone. And everyone was super supportive. I had actually friends in town from the Midwest as well that were there. And everything was absolutely like very positive with them. They're my biggest support system. My friends have always been more family to me than some parts of my family have been, especially just being an only child. I always wanted to have siblings, and I think I yearned for that more than anything, so I've always latched onto my friendships more than anything else in my life. And coming out with my family ends up not being the prettiest story, which we can get into, so having my friends be there for me during that time was basically my biggest lifeline. My dad's complete frame of reference, coming from San Juan and growing up in a super conservative, super sheltering family his whole life, was just completely different than anything that I ever experienced growing up. And so I actually was in New York for I think 2 years when I finally started dating someone. And I remember I went home, and the whole time I was home I was I wanted them to know, but I didn't want them to know who it was or what pronoun it was, basically. So I kept referring to them as they and us and them, and was super vague about it, and they just thought that was so weird. And I guess I was trying to give them kind of a trail of asking the question, that way I didn't have to tell them, and they just refused to do it. And my parents are both the kinds of people where they'll believe anything that they want to believe in just to kind of feel comfortable. So I knew they were avoiding it, and I knew they were never going to ask me, but at the same time they're like, you can tell us, it's not a big deal, we'll support you, blah, 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 and kind of tried to trick me into thinking that if they knew, they would be cool with it. But at the same time, I had a lot of reservations with kind of just saying it. So, I kind of came back to New York after the holidays and that whole scenario, and the guy that I was dating at the time, he thought that I was pretty much out to my family because I was out to my friends. He never really asked me about it. And my dad actually came into town a few weeks later just to visit, and my parents are super fun people at the same time. So they always wanted to take my friends out with me and go get dinner and stuff. And I basically lied to my boyfriend and was just oh yeah, I'm busy with my dad, like, we're just gonna do us two this weekend. And, like, sure enough, social media, like, he's seeing, like, half of my friends' Snapchats and being like, oh, okay, like, everyone is there but me. So, like, clearly something's up. So he got super pissed about it, which is totally understandable because I was lying to him at that point. And we, like, sat down and he's just like, look, I can't, like, be in this relationship if you're gonna lie about your family. And, like, even if, you know, you had told me about your family, I don't think I could be in a relationship with someone who has that baggage and just, you know, isn't fully comfortable with themselves enough to take a stand with their family. He was, like, morally against it, which I thought was weird. Like, the way he framed it put a shit ton of pressure on me to go and come out, which was annoying. You know, and at the same time, I didn't want to, like, risk losing my first relationship, and I think everyone's first boyfriend is, like, kind of a redefinition of them as a gay person. It, like, gives you a lot more courage to go out and do things that you wouldn't have done being single, only because, you know, people can see that you're happy being gay, and that means that you have someone and there's a connection with that. So that was super important to me too. So, you know, I had a lot of pressure from him, and the next time that I was going to see my parents was on a ski trip later that spring. And so I get to the ski trip, and I'm there with just my mom and her twin sister, and my dad was, like, out doing something. And so I chose that moment, since I had those two alone, to tell them. And my aunt wasn't surprised at all. Like, I think she always knew in the back of her head. But my mom was, like, definitely in shock and definitely didn't want to hear it, but was at the same time, you know, at the end of the day, kind of, you know, we love you no matter what. Like, we'll figure this out. I think there was just a lot of shock for her to get through in that moment. And, you know, I had also built up in my head seeing, like, all of these, like, YouTube videos, probably things similar to VideoOut, or, like, what I'm doing right now, about these, like, oh, this two teen brothers come out to their dad in YouTube video, and it's super beautiful. And I just had this, like, really, like, cartoonish, like, positive expectation of how I was going to come out to my dad, and just have him be like, well, yeah, like, you're my kid, it's 20, whatever it was back then. You know, I'm gonna love you no matter what. And all my friends who had come out, you know, they all had that experience. All of them were, you know, their parents were there for them either way, and it really wasn't a big hurdle for them. It was just kind of more of a release. And I just, like, had a feeling in my gut that it wasn't gonna go well with my dad, but I think I had put all these things, these markers in my head that, you know, once I got there, things would be different. And sure enough, when I told my mom, she was like, do not tell your father. She's like, absolutely not. Like, we're going to have to figure out how to approach that one, like, much further down the line. She's like, we know, and, like, that's what matters right now. Just, like, save that one for later. And I was, like, on a mission. I was like, no, I'm, like, getting this done with. I'm going back to New York, like, a free man, like, for the first time in 23 years of my life. Like, I've dealt with this way too long already. Like, I don't have to wait any longer. It's, like... And at that point, too, like, I had waited until I was self-sufficient. Like, I wasn't relying on anyone else for my livelihood. So, like, I had every means to completely walk away if I had to and be perfectly fine. So I was on a chairlift going up a mountain in Utah with just my dad, and pretty much chose a moment where, like, he could not escape from me, like, whatsoever. And at the bottom of the chairlift, I'm like, so you've been wanting to know who I'm dating? And he's like, yeah, like, finally, like, you're gonna tell me? Like, he was super excited about it. And I told him, and I was like, oh, well, you know, his name is... And he's just like, what? And, like, didn't hear me. I'm like, yeah, I'm dating a man. Like, he's a guy. He's my boyfriend. And he's just, like, didn't really, like, register. It still took him a few more minutes of, like, what? And then... It was just like, and I thought it was about to go totally uphill and just be like this really awesome moment, and then it just, like, tanked out of nowhere. And he was just, like, completely in shock, like, no. We, like, get to the top of the chairlift, and he just, like, takes off without me. And I, like, go after him as fast as I can. He's, like, bombing, like, we're not in, like, bunny hills either. We're, like, in Utah, like, skiing, like, real mountains. So it was, like, a, you know, probably a 10 or 15 minute ride back down to the base, and then, like, another 10-minute ride down to, like, where our truck was in the parking lot. And I, like, find him in the parking lot of the truck, and he's, like, somewhere between, like, furious and crying, and is more, like, blaming himself in a lot of ways. Like, he said some really dark stuff about whether or not, like, he could even live with himself knowing that, like, his only son ended up being gay. Like, I think like, in his mind, like, the embarrassment of what that meant and having to tell that to anyone else was, like, so overwhelming that he just would have rather given up than have to do it. So then I started to get angry because I'm like, this is not how a parent reacts to anyone who's their child. Like, you're being insane. And it just kind of devolved into this, like, awful, like, screaming fight of just, like, the worst things you could basically say to anyone. And yeah, it just was, like, this super horrible, super dramatic moment. And it was pretty much, like, all of my fears, like, of coming out, like, that I'd ever feared of for 23 years, realized in one moment. And then my mom and my aunt come and find us, and they see this whole thing going on, and they're like, oh shit, like, he told them. And so then they're trying to, like, calm both of us down, but it was, like, so irate the rest of the night between us. Like, I really thought my family was going to end in that moment, because my mom was like, well, like, I can't be with my father, she couldn't be with my dad anymore if, like, he was going to hold up this reaction. She's like, I have to follow you, like, you're my son, I love you no matter what, your dad's insane. And and so, you know, I felt horrible for her, because she was kind of like, well, why can't you just listen to me and wait, like, you know, the stress this is really putting on our family at this moment, it's just like, we could have approached this so many different ways, like, you know, we should have been in this together rather than you just doing it, which I kind of, like, saw her point, but at the same time, like, I think that, you know, you can put things off for so long. And I really thought he was going to, like, calm down after a while, and we'd, like, kind of, like, figure things out. But he really just, like, was not turning down. Like, at that moment in time, it was, like, cutting me out of the family, like, and we're never going to speak to each other again. Like, I was about to get in a car and, like, fly back to New York by myself. And I think I saw, like, the catatonic state this, like, entire situation put my mom through. So in that moment, I was like, look, like, your life with him is, like, you guys are dependent on each other. Like, I'm not going to destroy your life in this moment over the way I came out. We're going to have to figure out a different approach. And, like, I can go back to New York and, like, have my life back and everything will be fine. And my dad was as childish as believing that I could just, like, not be gay anymore. Because, like, he was like, you know, the choice, the lifestyle, and he didn't understand at that moment in time that, you know, you're born this way. And so just to kind of, like, resolve that situation that we were in, I was just like, okay, fine, like, I'll turn it off, like, never mind, forget I said it. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah, sure, if that's what you want to believe, like, whatever helps you sleep at night, basically. And so from that moment on, we just never talked about it for, like, another year. And, you know, me and my mom kind of talked about it, but even she got in the camp of, like, she couldn't, like, deal with being with him all the time by herself and, like, not dealing with the issue. So I think she had kind of buried it too, and we just all let it go and, like, let it sit in our heads for a year between each other, basically. And then it wasn't until over a year later that when I'd broken up with that boyfriend and, like, moved on and, like, kind of lived my life for a while, and then I met, you know, someone that was really, really special to me. You know, like, that first real big love that you find. And there was no way that I was not having him involved in my family. Like, I wanted him to come on every trip with me. I wanted him to be in every picture with me. Like, I didn't want to have to feel like I couldn't fully express across all the channels of my life that I was with this person. So, you know, when things got serious with him, my parents were coming back out to visit for 4th of July, and I kind of had figured out, too, that, you know, I had gone into a whole separate world to tell them. They hadn't ever come to my world in New York to really figure this out. So, so when they came for 4th of July, I just made them finally kind of deal with it, which, like, they both knew. It was so stupid that we even sat there for, like, a year. I think it just took that long to even process it. And at least at that point, you know, my mom had really come to terms with it. Although she was like, this would have been so much easier if you had, like, come out in high school. We had just built up this, like, truth of you because you dated these girls and all this other stuff. And I was like, yeah, but, like, at the same time, like, how many times throughout my life were me and you, like, watching, like, what not to wear and, like, going shopping together, or, like, just being, like, the cliche gay boy that I know that I was with you, and like terrible at all the other things that all the other straight boys were doing. You know, like, I feel like all those signs were there, like, you know me better than anyone knows me, like, you can't really say that that's, you know, something that I did to you. And she understood that, and yeah, from that point on, you know, she kind of made my dad start to really deal with it. He still didn't want to talk about it for a while, but at least, like, the family wasn't shattered anymore, so, like, that was step one. And then slowly over time, things just got way better. Like, he just kind of, I think, accepted it, started to learn more about my world, started to ask me about my world, started to ask me about my boyfriend and what we were doing, what kind of things we liked, why we were in love in the first place. And it really did just take time, as dramatic as it was. And I don't think I believed people at first when they said that it just has to get better. I always thought that was just very cliche, and I always thought that people were, at least in my experience with my dad, he's always been very stubborn, so I was skeptical of his ability, of how long it would take for him to really come around. But fast forward, you know, 2 or 3 years later now, we have an amazing relationship. You know, he loves my boyfriend just as much as I do. And yeah, everything's been peachy keen since then. And the professional stuff, like, I've never had a bad experience with work, so, or like in any particular, like, good one.